Hello there, it's Linda Stacy of Living Blueprints, and today I'm talking about stress, the implications of stress, what it is, how can we get better at reducing it or being aware of what's causing it, all of these things. So again, Linda Stacy of Living Blueprints. If you find these videos valuable, I'd appreciate if you like on Facebook and YouTube, or depending on where you are, and subscribing on YouTube is awesome as well. So, stress, especially right now, it's a thing, but it was a thing before COVID too. And, a lot of stress is based on uncertainty and not being fully aware of what could be coming, or not being aware of change on the horizon, and things like this. And so it's a collective thing. It's an environmental thing, something that happens inside of our work, inside our communities, inside our country. But it's also very personal, right? And ultimately, we do have a choice in terms of what we react to, how we respond, what we pay attention to. Those things are within our control to some extent, although it can be really hard when we're in very, dense environments where there's a lot of people and opinions and energy running around that might not match where we want to be in terms of our own energy. So I'm going to talk about a few different things. One around this uncertainty and kind of managing uncertainty. I was working with a client a few years ago who we were kind of doing a strategy session. She had a ton going on in her life, professionally, personally. And so, we started to map out a bunch of things and really just a course of action for the next few days, over the next couple of weeks. And it turned out that like 40 to 50% of the things that were occupying her brain space were things that she couldn't take action on because they were kind of in someone else's hands at the time, for the time being. And I think that happens a lot, that we get stressed about things that maybe aren't complete, or we're not sure what's going to happen. And it's really not our place to fully own that thing. So why take up the brain space and clog ourselves up with those things that we can't actually move forward, that we have no control over? And maybe we think that we're not going to be ready for what happens, the consequence of however that thing will turn out. I found in my life, when I let these things go, usually they work themselves out, and usually it's okay, and usually there isn't a hugely negative impact on me or the people I love, for that matter. So, stress, I want to say too that, stress is kind of built around this, this thing that's in us, in our biological core, in terms of the way that we react to things, and the flight or fright mechanisms, so we either freeze or we run, we shock or we take massive action. And that's all cool. And, I talk about that in other videos. But one thing to just be aware of is that as a result of this biological mechanism that's there to kind of protect us, we're secreting cortisol and adrenaline, and that's not good for our systems over time. It was awesome for us in primitive days when we needed a good spurt to kind of run away from something, to actually physically run away, but now we're not running away physically, so it's just pulsing through our bodies all the time. So now it's just kind of burning us out from the inside. So there are biological, physical health reasons to work on not paying attention as much to the uncertainties and the unknowns. So often we're worrying about things that aren't ours, that we don't really have control over. Again, how can we let go? Is there a possibility to be still in that moment where we're really, really worried about this? Having patience and trust that some things take their own time, even though we'd wish that they would just move along. So I want to say a few things, about the workspace, because work creates an awful lot of stress, and some tips for this. In terms of your workday, there's lots of things that could come up that you're not prepared for. Overall, I recommend that people attempt to pre-pave how they'd like their day to show up. So how can you kind of look at the course of the day and know what those activities are going to be, and think about the best possible scenario that could play out? Often we're focused on, oh my God, what's going to happen, or what if this happens? Why not think about what if the best possible thing happens? why not? You know, no matter what, you're going to be okay. You're going to be able to respond to whatever happens in your life. I mean, you have to this point, right? I mean, if you're watching this, you're still breathing, you're still doing the things. So I really recommend at the beginning of your workday to take 5 minutes and look at things. I have a couple of different videos on either, you know, calendaring or previewing your day or your week, or, you know, the work from home worksheet that I did several weeks ago. And I can link to these things underneath the video, whether you're in YouTube or in Facebook. But think about the cool person that you are at your best. Like, who are you at your best? And bring that into every moment, every activity of your day. I mean, why not, right? In my experience too, I have to say that every day almost, I get some kind of request that comes into my work queue where I feel like there's some percentage of it that I don't know how to take action on. And this may or may not be true for you in your work life. We just have a lot of kind of crazy things that come into us that deal with the minutia of business and industry data. And it can be very, very taxing when you don't know everything there is to know to answer a question. So sometimes though, all I need to do is take a moment, take a breath, remember that I know more than the person who's asking me. That is almost 100% the case. And that I often know, even though I think I only know 30%, I probably know 70% of the steps to get there. And at my fingertips, I might even have the remaining 30%. Although there's always the case in my profession that there are some questions that just can't be answered the way they've been asked. And that could exist for you too. And you're not responsible for that. I think sometimes we take responsibility and onus when we can't give someone exactly what they asked for. And we're just kind of the messenger sometimes. We're not responsible. We're doing our best to answer questions as best we can. So, you know, those are some things around work, and just, you know, recognizing that you do know a lot more than you think you do. The day probably isn't going to go according to a perfect plan, and that's okay. That's what makes things interesting and exciting, and that's what helps us come up with new creative ways to approach things. It's all good. And overall, I'd like to say, you know, as stress creeps up, as you feel your heart rate increasing, and that potentially that heart rate increase could then be triggering that cortisol and the adrenaline, how can you take some pause? How can you restrain a little bit your reaction to that thing? Ultimately, we're reacting to fear, and many of us don't necessarily identify with it as fear because maybe that makes us sound like we're weak or something. But really, maybe if you said it another way, fear, we kind of freak out because we're aware that something could change, or we might not know the answer, or there's just some kind of threat, you know, that we don't have the full scope of what could happen in our environment. And overall, you know, how can we just restrain the reaction to that? How can we stay open and say, I'm probably going to do okay through this, and I might even learn a couple of things. And again, just not tune in. We have the ability, we have the choice to tune in to the chaos in our environment, or we can create our own radio station. We can decide what we want to play and what we tune into. I'm not saying bury our heads in the sand and such. I'm just saying cultivate the environment, at least in your headspace, that you want for yourself. And one of the gifts of this COVID and quarantine for some of us working at home, at least I have found this, is that my physical environment is much more controlled. For some of you, it's the opposite because you have children at home and you have confined spaces, and I have compassion for you, and I hope that things are getting better. And I know that when things go back to quote unquote normal, you are going to have a huge new appreciation for certain aspects of how it was pre-COVID, if you don't already. But I know that I have been more focused in my work and more productive because I don't have kind of that physical, the anxiety of all the people in my environment, many of whom often are, you know, first time in the workplace, and for some reason I feel like I could pick up all of their, you know, all of their energy. And I'm hoping that however we go back to this office life, that I'm able to bring back some of what I've been able to cultivate at home, being in my own space where it's a little bit more controlled. So those are a few things. And I want to say again, if you're on Facebook and wherever you're watching, Facebook or YouTube, please like the video if you found it useful, and subscribing on YouTube is awesome too. And I just want to say a couple of things in terms of, what I'm doing with Living Blueprints and this business. And for me, it's really more than a business for me. I believe really that the ability to have freer, more satisfying, and more energized experiences of work and life, which I'm pretty sure all of us would like, it is a product of three things. And again, I'm kind of talking more about work here. We really need to be grounded in a strong knowing of our strengths and what we uniquely bring to the workplace. So, what is it at your core that you are, who you are, that you bring all the time, and bring that. I mean, really bring who you are and be that awesome person in service to whoever is paying you to do work. The second thing is having the skills to navigate in these constantly shifting, distracted, interrupted environments, and navigate with agility, not just get by, but be agile. So that's a lot about what I talk about with Living Blueprints, but I also talk about the first thing, about really knowing who you are at your core. And then the third thing I think is pretty important is that we are better off when we're working in teams or groups where we find that ourselves aligned and empowered, and we kind of share at least some of the same values about what we're trying to bring into our organizations. And I find that this is often very lacking. So these three things can be kind of drowned out. They can be drowned out by competing priorities. We lose sense of who we are at our core and the awesome things that we bring. We struggle with navigating because things are constantly shifting. The workplace is more and more distractive, and let's face it, we're human beings, and it's hard to change our behavior sometimes, even if it's going to improve our experience. And around team alignment, it's too easily disrupted because there's either a lack of strategic focus, you never talk about these things, lack of awareness, there's differences in approach that don't get talked about, and sometimes personality and ego and fear get in the way, as I talked about fear-based bosses a couple of weeks ago. So, it's easy to be swept up by these things. It's easy to have a really crappy experience of work and life. So, this is really about how I work with individual organizations in terms of Living Blueprints. And now it's, doing remote sessions with folks, which is fine. And I look really forward to being live in front of groups again in the future. I just did an association in Utah, which is an opportunity that would not have presented itself had it not been for COVID in this environment. They'd be having live events, and I don't think I'd be flying to Utah for this particular type of event. Anyway, I hope that you found this valuable. Again, subscribe, like, and have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.